6 men cornered the obese girl behind the saloon. Then the mountain man said, "Try me first." The town of Clemson Flats wasn't much to look at, a crooked row of wooden buildings leaning into the wind like drunkards at closing time, a main street that turned to boot-sucking mud whenever the rains came, and exactly one source of entertainment, the Brass Bell Saloon. It was 1887, and the frontier had started to lose its wildness in some places, but not here. Here, the law was whatever Sheriff Dockery felt like enforcing that particular day, and what he felt like most days was nothing at all. The saloon itself was a 2-story structure with peeling paint and a sign that swung on rusty chains. Inside, the air was perpetually thick with tobacco smoke, cheap whiskey fumes, and the smell of unwashed men who'd spent their days herding cattle, breaking horses, or digging in the nearby silver mines that had brought this sorry collection of humanity together in the first place. Behind the bar worked a girl named Hattie Colson. She wasn't pretty by the standards of the day, or any day, if the patrons were to be believed. She was large, perhaps 300 pounds, with a round face that might have been pleasant if it weren't always set in an expression of resigned wariness. Her hands were red and chapped from washing dishes in scalding water, and her dress, the only one she owned, was patched in a dozen places and too short at the ankles, because nothing in town was made for a woman of her size. Hattie had arrived in Clemson Flats 2 years prior, riding in the back of a supply wagon. Her father had died of fever in Kansas, her mother years before that, and she'd had nowhere else to go. Her uncle owned a dry goods store in Clemson Flats, or so she'd been told. When she arrived, she discovered the uncle had been dead for 6 months, and the store had burned down 3 months after that. With no money and no prospects, she'd stood in the middle of that muddy street with a single carpetbag and nowhere to sleep. Silas Trent, the owner of the Brass Bell, had found her there. He was a hard man with narrow eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile sometime back in the 60s. But he was practical, and he saw in Hattie someone desperate enough to work for almost nothing. "I'll give you a corner in the storage room," he'd said, looking her up and down with open distaste. "You wash dishes, scrub floors, empty the spittoons, haul out the trash. I'll feed you table scraps and whatever the cook don't want. No wages, but you got a roof. Take it or leave it." Hattie had taken it. What choice did she have? That had been 2 years ago. 2 years of rising before dawn to start the fires, of washing glasses until her hands bled, of mopping up vomit and blood from Saturday night brawls. 2 years of making herself as small as possible, an impossible task given her size, and trying to avoid the attention of the men who came to drink. But avoiding attention was like trying to avoid rain in a thunderstorm. The men noticed her. They always noticed her. And what they noticed, they mocked. "Hey, Hattie, you eating all the pies again? Careful, boys, she might sit on you. Takes 2 horses to move that much, woman." The comments came daily, sometimes hourly. Hattie had learned to keep her eyes down, to pretend she didn't hear, to let the words roll off like water off oilcloth. But they didn't roll off. They soaked in, each one a little wound that never quite healed before the next one opened. The worst were the Saturday nights, when the saloon was packed shoulder to shoulder with miners and cowboys who'd been paid and were determined to drink away every cent before Monday morning. They'd get liquor brave and cruel, placing bets on her weight, asking if she'd ever been kissed, making lewd suggestions that were really just elaborate jokes designed to humiliate. Hattie never sat at the bar. She never lingered in the main room longer than necessary. She learned the rhythms of the place, when to appear with a mop, when to vanish into the back, how to move along the walls like a shadow, unnoticed until someone needed something. She lived in a storage room that smelled of old beer and mouse droppings. Her bed was a pile of grain sacks. Her pillow was her rolled-up shawl. On cold nights, she could see her breath, and she'd wrap herself in an old horse blanket that Silas had said she could use, though he'd made it clear she was borrowing it, not keeping it. The only person who showed her any kindness was Mei Lin, the Chinese woman who ran the laundry next door. Sometimes, when Hattie took out the trash, Mei Lin would be in her doorway, and she'd press a still warm bun into Hattie's hands without a word. Hattie would eat it standing in the alley, crying sometimes from the simple mercy of it, but mercy was in short supply in Clemson Flats. It was December when everything changed, Winter had come down hard from the mountains, bringing snow that turned the streets into frozen ruts and a wind that cut through every gap in every wall. The saloon was packed that Saturday night, every table full, every stool at the bar occupied. The stove in the corner glowed red hot, but it couldn't seem to warm the room. Men kept their coats on, their collars turned up. Hattie worked in the back, her hands in dishwater that had long since gone lukewarm. She could hear the roar of conversation from the main room, the occasional burst of laughter, the tinny piano player attempting something that might have been Buffalo Gals. Around 9 o'clock, Silas appeared in the doorway. "Hattie, trash needs to go out, and bring up another barrel from the cellar. The boys are thirsty tonight." Hattie dried her hands on her apron and nodded. She dreaded going outside. It was freezing, and the wind would go right through her thin dress, but there was no arguing with Silas. She grabbed the 2 overflowing bins of trash and pushed through the back door into the alley. The cold hit her like a slap. She gasped, her breath plumbing out in white clouds. The alley behind the brass bell was narrow, bordered on one side by the saloon's back wall and on the other by a storage building that belonged to the general store. Both ends opened onto side streets, but neither had a lamp, and at night the alley was dark as a mine shaft. Hattie hurried to the trash heap at the alley's midpoint and dumped the bins. She was turning back toward the door when she heard voices. "Well, well, look what wandered out here all alone." She froze. 6 men emerged from the shadows at the far end of the alley. She recognized them. They were regulars, miners mostly, though one ran a freight business and another was a ranch hand. They'd all had too much to drink. She could tell by the way they walked, loose-limbed and overly careful. "Evening, Miss Hattie," said the one in front, a man named Crenshaw who had a scar running down one cheek. "Cold night for a walk." I need to get back inside," Hattie said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Aw, don't run off," said another, a squat man with a thick beard. "We just want to talk." But they didn't want to talk. She could see it in their eyes, in the way they spread out, blocking the way back to the door. 2 more men appeared at the other end of the alley. She was surrounded. "You know," Crenshaw said, taking a step closer, "we was just saying inside how you're the only girl in this town we ain't never seen smile." "That true, Hattie? You ever smile?" "Please, I need to get back to work." "Work can wait," the bearded man interrupted. "We got a question. How much you weigh? We got bets running." The others laughed. They were forming a loose circle now, 6 men ringing her in. None of them touched her, but they didn't need to. The threat was in their proximity, their numbers, their laughter. "I heard," said a tall man with a missing tooth, "that you ain't never been kissed. That can't be true, can it? Big healthy girl like you?" More laughter. Hattie's heart was pounding. She looked from face to face, searching for mercy, finding none. "Maybe we should fix that," Crenshaw said. "What do you boys say? Should we give Miss Hattie her first kiss?" "I don't know," said the bearded man with mock seriousness. "Might need all 6 of us just to get our arms around her." They roared with laughter at that. One of them, a young man who couldn't have been more than 20, kicked over one of the trash bins. The contents spilled across the frozen ground. "Oops," he said. "Better clean that up, Hattie. Don't want old Silas getting mad." She bent automatically to pick up the spilled refuse, and they laughed harder. "Look at her, like a trained dog." Hattie's hands were shaking. She could feel tears starting, hot against her cold cheeks. She was backing toward the wall now, the rough boards pressing against her back. There was nowhere to go. The men were closing in, not touching her, but close enough that she could smell the whiskey on their breath. "Oh, look, she's crying," said the young one. "That ain't no fun." "Maybe she's crying 'cause she's so happy," Crenshaw said. 6 men paying attention to her all at once. Probably the best day of her life. They were so close now. One reached out as if to touch her face, and she flinched violently. They thought this was hilarious. Then, from the mouth of the alley, a new sound cut through their laughter, the heavy, deliberate footsteps of boots on frozen earth. The men turned. A figure was approaching from the street-side entrance, backlit by the distant glow of a street lamp. He was tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in animal skins and heavy canvas, with a thick beard and hair that hung to his shoulders. He carried himself with the kind of easy confidence that comes from living alone in dangerous places. "Evening, boys," the man said. His voice was deep and calm, almost friendly. "This ain't your concern, friend," Crenshaw said, though his tone had lost some of its swagger. The man in skins walked closer, and Hattie could see his face now. She didn't know him. He wasn't a regular at the saloon, but there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Not anger exactly, more like a complete absence of fear. "See, that's where you're wrong," the man said. He was standing at the edge of their circle now, and though he hadn't raised his voice or made any threatening gesture, the dynamic in the alley had shifted. "When I see 6 men cornering a woman in a dark alley, that becomes my concern real quick." "We're just having a conversation," the bearded man said. "Don't look like she wants a conversation," the man replied. He turned his head slightly to look at Hattie. "Ma'am, these men bothering you?" Hattie's voice wouldn't work. She managed a small nod. The man turned back to the 6. He took a step forward, placing himself directly between Hattie and the others. His back was to her now, his body a wall of fur and muscle. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, and his voice was still calm, still almost pleasant. "You boys are going to head back inside, finish your drinks, and forget this ever happened. And this lady," he paused, "is going to go back to her work without anybody giving her any more trouble. Sound fair? And who the hell are you to tell us what to do?" Crenshaw demanded. "Name's Thorne. I come down from the mountains now and again to trade pelts. But my name don't matter much. What matters is this. If you want to play games of circling and intimidating, I'm right here. But let's make it interesting. Not all of you at once. That wouldn't be sporting. One at a time. You can take turns trying me." The alley went silent. The men were looking at each other, and Hattie could see the calculation in their eyes. Thorne wasn't particularly tall, maybe 6 feet, but he was solid as an oak, and there was something about him that suggested he'd been in more than his share of fights, and won them. "We was just joking around," the young one said, his voice uncertain. "Didn't sound like joking to me," Thorne replied. "Sounded like 6 men getting their courage up to do something shameful, but I could be wrong. So here's your chance to prove it. You want to test yourselves against someone? I'm volunteering. Come on then, who's first?" Nobody moved. "I don't see the lady laughing," Thorne continued. "See, that's how you tell a joke from something else. If the person you're joking about ain't laughing, it ain't a joke. It's just cruelty." He took another step forward. The men took a step back, almost in unison. "This is ridiculous," Crenshaw said, but his voice had gone high and thin. "We ain't got time for this." "Then I suggest you make time to apologize to the lady," Thorne said. "Apologize?" The bearded man sounded incredulous. "That's right. You scared her. You treated her with disrespect. An apology seems appropriate." There was a long, tense moment. Then, one by one, the men muttered something that might have been apologies and slunk away toward the street. Crenshaw was last, shooting Thorne a look that promised this wasn't over, but he went too. When they were gone, Thorne turned to Hattie. Up close, she could see he had gray eyes and a scar through one eyebrow. He looked to be in his 30s, weathered in the way of men who lived rough. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked. Hattie found her voice. "Yes, thank you. Thank you." "What's your name?" Hattie Colson." "Well, Miss Colson, those boys won't bother you again tonight, but you shouldn't be out here alone. It ain't safe." "I work here, in the saloon. I have to take out the trash and—" Her voice broke. She was shaking, whether from cold or fear or relief, she couldn't tell. Thorne frowned. He shrugged out of his outer coat, a heavy bearskin with the fur still on, and draped it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body and smelled of pine smoke and leather. "You'll freeze," Hattie protested. "I got layers," Thorne said. "Come on, I'll walk you back inside." He picked up the spilled trash with his bare hands, dumped it back in the bin, and set it by the door. Then he opened the door and ushered her inside with a courteous nod, as if she were a lady and not a dishwasher who slept in a storage room. Silas was there, looking irritated. "Where the hell you been? I got glasses piling up." He stopped when he saw Thorne. "Who are you?" "Just helping the lady with the trash," Thorne said mildly. "Heavy work for one person." Silas's eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue. He jerked his head toward the back room. "Get to work, Hattie." Thorne caught her eye and gave her a small nod. Then he turned and walked back through the saloon. Hattie stood there for a moment, her hands clutching the bearskin coat, before Silas barked at her again, and she hurried to the back. She didn't see Thorne again that night. She worked until past midnight, until the last drunk had been pushed out the door and the floor had been mopped and the glasses washed. When she finally stumbled to her storage room, she was so exhausted she could barely stand. But she hung the bearskin coat carefully on a nail, and she fell asleep thinking that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't entirely cruel. The next morning, Hattie woke to angry voices. She sat up, disoriented, and realized they were coming from the main room of the saloon. She recognized Silas's voice, and then another man's. Crenshaw, she thought. Her stomach sank. She crept to the door and peered through a crack. Crenshaw and two of his friends from last night were standing at the bar, facing Silas. "Making trouble," Crenshaw was saying. "That girl of yours caused a scene last night, made us all look bad in front of a stranger." "What are you talking about?" Silas demanded. "We was just having some fun with her and some mountain man stuck his nose in, made it seem like we was doing something wrong." "Were you?" Silas asked, though his tone suggested he didn't much care either way. "Point is, she attracted trouble. Bad for business." Silas's expression darkened. He turned toward the back. "Hattie, get out here." Hattie's hands were trembling as she opened the door and stepped into the main room. It was early. The saloon wouldn't open for hours, and the morning light coming through the dirty windows made everything look gray and cold. "These men say you caused trouble last night," Silas said. "I didn't. I just went to take out the trash like you told me," Hattie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And somehow that ended with you needing to be rescued," Silas said. "That true?" "They followed me into the alley." "Followed you?" Crenshaw interrupted with a harsh laugh. "We were just stepping out for some air. You got in our way, you and your—" He gestured at her body with obvious disgust. "I think," Silas said slowly, "maybe it's time you moved on, Hattie." The words hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "You're more trouble than you're worth. I've been patient, but I can't have you driving away customers." "I didn't drive anyone away." "That ain't how they see it, and the customer's always right." Silas crossed his arms. "You got till the end of the day to clear out." Hattie's vision was going blurry. She couldn't breathe. Where would she go? What would she do? It was December. She had no money, no family, nowhere. The saloon's front door swung open, letting in a gust of cold air. Thorne stood in the doorway, a leather satchel over one shoulder. He looked at the tableau, Crenshaw and his friends smirking, Silas with his arms crossed, Hattie with tears streaming down her face, and his expression went hard. "Morning," he said, his voice flat. "We're closed," Silas said. "Then I guess I picked a good time for a private conversation." Thorne walked to the bar and dropped his satchel on it with a heavy thud. "I got pelts to trade. Best beaver, mink, and bear in these parts. Was planning to do business with you, seeing as you're the biggest establishment in town." Silas's expression changed immediately. Pelts meant money, and money meant attention. "Well, let's see what you got." Thorne opened the satchel and pulled out several beautiful pelts, thick, glossy, expertly cleaned. Silas's eyes lit up. "These are fine, real fine. I could move these easily. What do you want for them?" "That depends," Thorne said. He glanced at Hattie, then back at Silas. "Word is you're firing your help." "How is that your business?" "Because I'm deciding whether to do business with you." Thorne's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath. "See, I spend most of my time in the mountains. When I come to town, I like to know I'm dealing with honest people, and honest people don't fire a woman for being attacked by a gang of drunks." "She wasn't attacked," Crenshaw protested. "I was there," Thorne said, not looking at him. "I saw what I saw." "She's a liability," Silas said, but he sounded less certain now. Thorne pushed the pelts across the bar. "These are worth about $200, more than enough to cover whatever tab these boys been running. I'll trade them to you fair and square, but if you fire that girl, I walk. And I'll make sure every trapper and hunter between here and the Rockies knows that the brass bell don't respect its workers. You'll have a hard time getting quality pelts after that." The room went very still. $200 was serious money. But more than that, Silas knew that trappers talked, and they had long memories. If word got around that he'd wronged one of them, even indirectly, they'd take their business elsewhere. "And if I keep her," Silas said slowly, "then we got a deal, and I'll spread the word that you run a fair establishment." Thorne leaned on the bar. "Your choice." Crenshaw was red-faced with anger. "You can't." I can, Thorne said, finally looking at him. And I am. You got a problem with that. We can settle it the same way I offered last night, one at a time. Nobody spoke. After a long moment, Crenshaw spat on the floor and stalked out, his friends trailing behind him. Silas looked at the pelts, then at Hattie, then at Thorne. Fine, he said at last. She stays, but if there's more trouble, there won't be, Thorne said, because people in this town are going to learn to mind their manners. He pushed the satchel toward Silas. Now, about that trade. While Silas examined the pelts more carefully, calculating their value, Thorne caught Hattie's eye and gave her a small nod. She was crying again, but this time from relief and something else, gratitude so profound it felt like its own kind of pain. Over the next few weeks, word spread about what had happened. The story got embellished in the telling, as stories do, but the core remained. The mountain man had faced down 6 men for a girl nobody cared about. Some people thought he was a fool. Others thought there was something admirable in it, though they wouldn't have said so out loud. But what nobody could deny was that the atmosphere in the brass bell changed. The cruel jokes didn't stop entirely, but they became quieter, more furtive. When Hattie walked through the main room, people looked away instead of calling out. It wasn't respect exactly, but it was something. Thorne came to town every few weeks after that, always with pelts to trade. And every time he made a point of checking in with Hattie, not in a showy way. He'd just appear in the kitchen doorway while she was washing dishes and ask how she was doing, if Silas was treating her fair, if anybody had given her trouble. I'm fine, she always said, though fine was a relative term. Good, Thorne would reply. You need anything, you let me know. He never asked for anything in return, never suggested she owed him, never made her feel like his kindness came with strings attached. And that, more than anything, was what undid her. She'd spent so long believing she deserved the cruelty that her size and her poverty made her less worthy of basic human decency. Thorne's matter-of-fact kindness challenged that belief in a way that was both painful and healing. Then, one March evening, something unexpected happened. A new worker had been hired. A Chinese boy named Wei, couldn't have been more than 14, brought in to help with the heavy lifting now that spring trading season was starting up. He was small and thin, with a queue down his back and clothes that had seen better days. Hattie was in the main room, delivering clean glasses to the bar when she heard laughter. She turned and saw a group of men surrounding Wei in the corner. They'd taken his hat and were tossing it back and forth over his head while he jumped uselessly to retrieve it. Look at him jump! Like a trained monkey. The boy's face was red with humiliation and anger. He was trying not to cry, Hattie could tell, trying to maintain some shred of dignity. She looked around. Silas was at the other end of the bar, deliberately ignoring the scene. The other customers were either laughing or pretending not to notice. Nobody was going to help. Hattie set down her tray of glasses. Her heart was pounding, but she walked across the room and pushed through the circle of men. "Give him back his hat," she said. The men looked at her in surprise. "What?" "I said give him back his hat. You're acting like children." One of the men, a teamster named Dutch, laughed. "Since when do you give orders?" "Since right now," Hattie said. Her voice was shaking, but she held her ground. "Leave him alone." "Or what?" Dutch took a step toward her. "You gonna make us?" "No," said a familiar voice from the doorway, "but I might." Thorne had just walked in, snowmelt still dripping from his coat. He surveyed the scene and his expression darkened. "Problem here, Hattie?" "These men took Wei's hat and won't give it back," Hattie said. Thorne walked over. He didn't say anything, just held out his hand. After a moment, Dutch dropped the hat into it. Thorne handed it to Wei, who snatched it and retreated behind Hattie. "Thank you," Thorne said to Hattie, his tone making it clear he was thanking her for standing up, not for calling him. "I didn't need you to rescue me," Hattie said, surprising herself. Thorne smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. "I know you didn't, but I appreciate you calling me out just the same." Later, after Wei had been sent home and the evening crowd had thinned, Thorne found Hattie in the kitchen. "That was brave," he said. "What you did for the boy." "It wasn't brave, it was just right. Same thing sometimes." Thorne leaned against the doorframe. "I'm heading back to the mountains tomorrow. Won't be back until summer, most likely. You going to be all right?" "I think so," Hattie said, and for the first time, she actually believed it. "Good." Thorne reached into his coat and pulled out a small leather pouch. "This is for you. Payment for some work I need done." "What work?" "Keeping an eye on things while I'm gone, making sure people behave themselves. You're good at that." Hattie opened the pouch and gasped. There were gold coins inside, more money than she'd seen in her life. "I can't." "You can," Thorne said firmly. "You earned it. Use it however you want. Buy yourself a real dress, rent a room, save it. I don't care. But it's yours." He tipped his hat to her and left before she could argue. That summer, Hattie used some of the money to buy a good dress and a real bed frame for the storage room. She used more of it to pay for Way to take English lessons with the school teacher, and she saved the rest because she had learned that having money meant having options, and having options meant freedom. When Thorne returned in July, pulling a mule loaded with pelts, Hattie was waiting on the saloon's porch. She'd gained more weight over the winter. She was just built that way, but she stood straighter now. When men made their jokes, she looked them in the eye instead of looking away. "Welcome back," she said. Thorne grinned. "Good to see you, Hattie. Place still standing, so I guess you did your job." "More or less." They fell into an easy friendship after that. Thorne was never going to be a permanent fixture in Clemson Flats. The mountains were his home, and he was restless in town. But whenever he came down to trade, he and Hattie would sit in the kitchen and talk. He told her about life in the high country, about tracking elk and avoiding grizzlies, and the particular silence of snow falling on pine trees. She told him about the small dramas of the saloon, about Way's progress with English, about Silas's latest schemes. "You ever think about leaving?" Thorne asked her once. "Where would I go?" "Anywhere you want. You got money saved. Could start fresh somewhere." Hattie considered this. "Maybe someday, but right now this is where I'm needed." She was thinking of Way, who looked at her like she'd hung the moon, and of the new girl Silas had hired, a half-Cheyenne woman named Rose, who was even more out of place than Hattie had been, and of the strange, fragile thing that was growing in this rough place, not quite respect, not quite kindness, but the beginning of both. Years later, people in Clemson Flats would still tell the story of the night 6 men cornered a girl in an alley, and a mountain man stepped between them with a simple challenge. "Try me first." Some versions of the story made Thorne 10 feet tall. Others said he'd fought all 6 men at once. None of them got it exactly right, because the real story wasn't about Thorne, not really. It was about the moment when someone decided that cruelty didn't have to be accepted, that dignity wasn't reserved for the pretty or the powerful, and that sometimes all it takes to change the world is one person willing to step between the victim and the mob. Hattie never became beautiful. She never became thin. She never became the kind of woman that people wrote songs about. But she became something else. Someone who knew her own worth, who stood up for others the way someone had once stood up for her. And in a hard place at a hard time, that was more valuable than gold.